Hello and welcome back. In today's video, we'll have a look at routing and navigation in Next.13. In Next.13, you can define pages, also known as routes, within the app folder. If we expand the app folder, we can see a few files in this folder. For instance, we can see a folder called API. We can see a globals.css file for the styles, but pay special attention to these two files, layout and page. Page and layout are specially reserved names in Next.13. If we open up the page file, we can see some code that looks very similar to HTML. But in the React world, this is actually called JSX, but it very much behaves exactly the same as HTML. And this is where we can define the content of the pages of our application. This page file in the app directory is also known as the root page, or the home page of our application. We can see this page in action by running the dev server. So I'll actually open up the integrated terminal, and from here we can run npm run dev. This will start our development server on localhost 3000. So if I click on localhost 3000, we can see our application running in the browser. And the content in this root page file is reflected on this main page over here. I'm just going to clean up this page for our demo purposes. I'm going to remove these imports. I'm also going to replace this main tag and all of this content with my own main tag, and we'll add a header with some text, and I'll just call this home page. After saving this, we should see the changes reflected immediately in the browser. So let's save this, and that worked. This does look a little bit messy due to the styling, so let's remove all of the styling from the project. So what I'll do is I'll go to the globals.css file, and I'm just going to delete everything in this file and save the changes. Let's refresh this. We can also go ahead and delete the page.module.css file. We'll cover styling in another video. In order to add another page to our project, we need to define a new route. We can create new routes by using folders. Within our app directory, we can create a new folder, and let's call it blog. Note that this folder, blog, is also known as a route segment in Next.js. If we go to this folder, or in the URL, if we go to localhost 3000/blog, we will get a 404 message because we haven't created the page content yet. But just take note that the folder that we created here, or the segment, also has a one-to-one relationship with the segment in the URL itself. So let's create the page for this segment. Within the blog folder, we can create a new file, and we will call this file page.js. Within page.js, we need to export a React component. Basically, all this means is we need to create a function which we export as a default function. So I will write export default function, and I will call this blog page. You can call this whatever you want. It's really up to you. But I will call mine blog page with parentheses followed by curly braces. Within this function, we need to return some JSX code or HTML code. For this, I'll simply return an h1 tag with the text blog page. Let's save this and let's refresh this page. And there you go. We are no longer receiving the 404 error, but instead we're getting this text over here. Let's create another route called dashboard, and within dashboard, let's create a page file. Within page, we need to export a React component. We'll give it a name like dashboard page, and we can test this out by going to localhost 3000/dashboard, and that gives us the dashboard page text. Just a note on the naming convention of these files. After setting up Next.js, the project came standard with some of these files, and the naming convention that was used was page.js. Of course, you could rename this file, and if you were using TypeScript, you could use page.ts instead. And another convention, which I prefer, is .jsx. The difference between the two, from what I can tell, is if I change this file back to .js for a second, if I wanted to use Emmet to quickly generate HTML code, I should be able to type something like div and then hit tab to generate this div element automatically. But as you can see, there's no auto-completion or any Emmet behavior at the moment. But if I rename this file to .jsx and I try this again, we now get this behavior. This is very helpful for quickly generating HTML tags or generating sample text using lorem. So I'm actually going to go ahead and rename all of these files to .jsx. So let's talk about nested routes. Let's say we wanted a nested route within the dashboard route. So in the browser, it would look something like this. Localhost 3000/dashboard, and maybe within dashboard, we have another route called settings. So in order to create nested routes, we can go to our dashboard route. Within the dashboard route, we'll simply create a new folder with the name of the new segment, which we will call settings. And within the settings route, we need to create a new file called page.jsx. Within this page file, we'll export a new React component, which we will call settings page. And let's return an h1 tag with the text settings page. And let's save that. I'm going to refresh the browser. And after refreshing the browser, we can see that our settings page is working. Just a little side note, routes like this that do not have any nested routes within it is called a leaf segment in Next 13. Let's create another nested route in dashboard. So within the dashboard folder, I'll create another folder called account. Within account, we need to create our page file and we need to export a React component, which I will call account page. Within account page, let's return an h1 tag with the text account page. Let's test it out in the browser. I'll just replace settings with account, and that's working. Let's talk about layouts. I'm actually going to go back to the home page, and within our main app directory, we can see this file called layout.jsx. In the layout file, you can define an HTML template or structure, which will be inherited by all routes within this folder. This layout will be applied to the page that is at the same level of this layout file, as well as all the nested routes within this directory. Let's demonstrate this. A practical use case for this would be to include something like the navigation bar or the footer or anything else that is generic for all the pages within this project. Let's have a look at this. Within the layout file, we can see that the layout file is inheriting all the global styles, which will be applied to the entire project. This also includes a font, and it's also exporting this metadata object, which we'll look at a bit later. But the layout file, like any other component within this project, exports a React component called root layout. And this function takes in a property called children. And this then returns any HTML which makes up the layout of this project. Children represents all the contents of the files within the project. So what layout is doing is it is defining an HTML structure for our project, and it is then wrapping the contents of the nested routes within this HTML structure. So to demonstrate the point, let's create a navigation. So within the body tag, I'll just create a nav section. Within nav, I'll create an unordered list, and let's give this list 2 items. We'll create a blog item as well as dashboard. Let's save this. And after saving this, we can see these 2 items showing up at the top of the page. So as per the layout, the first thing we define is the navigation, followed by the contents of the pages. That is why the navigation is showing up first, then followed by the contents of this page file. The layout is also inherited by any nested routes. So we can demonstrate that by going to localhost 3000 and we can go to our blog route. And within blog, we can still see this navigation bar. Let's try something like dashboard. Within dashboard, we can see those items, and we can drill in deeper by going to dashboard settings. And within the settings page, we can still see the contents of the layout file. It is important to note that we can have more than one layout file in our project. Because this layout file is sitting in the root of our project, this layout is applied to all files within the project itself. If we wanted a specific layout for the dashboard, we can do that as well. So within the dashboard folder, we can simply create a layout file called layout.jsx. We can then create our layout by typing export default function root layout, which takes in the children prop, And we can now return any layout which wraps the children property. So let's test this out by adding an h3 tag with the text dashboard layout. And let's save that. If we go to our dashboard route, we can see the dashboard layout text being inherited from the layout file. This layout file is also inherited by any nested routes within our dashboard folder. So if we go to dashboard/settings, we will also see the layout changes reflected here. So it's important to note that the layout files only apply their changes to page files that are sitting at the same level as the layout file, as well as any nested routes. The layout will not be applied to parent folders or pages. Let's now also have a look at metadata. Metadata is critical for SEO, and it is really easy to implement in Next.13. If we go to our root layout file, we can see this export object for metadata. And also in our project in the browser, if you have a look at the title, we can see the title Create Next App. This text is coming from this title in the metadata. We can go ahead and change this to something like Next Route Tutorial. If I save this, we can see the change reflected on this page. This metadata change will also affect any nested routes in the project. For example, let's go to our dashboard route. In dashboard, we can see that title, Next Route Tutorial. But let's say we wanted a different title for the dashboard route. We can do that quite easily by copying this metadata object. We can go to dashboard. Within dashboard, let's go to the layout page. And at the top of this page, we'll add the metadata object. Let's give this a different title, like dashboard. After saving this change, we can see our title was changed as well. I also want to mention that if you wanted a specific title for a route that doesn't use a custom layout file, then you can actually add this metadata object in the page itself. So I'll just copy this and let's go to our blog folder. So in the blog folder, we don't have a layout file. We only have the page itself. So at the top of this file, I'll paste in this metadata object and let's change the title to something like my blog and let's save this. Let's go to the blog route and within the blog route, we can see that title showing up as well. So for the metadata object, you've got the option of adding it to the layout file or to the page file itself. Next, let's talk about navigation. Let's go back to our home page for this. I'm actually going to close all of these files. And let's open up our layout file. In our layout file, we've got this navigation section over here, and I want to make these links clickable. So to add links to Next.js, we can import the following. At the top of our file, I will import link from next/link. I will then wrap this text in a link component like this. And the link component takes a property called href. And within href, we can specify the route that we want to navigate to. So for this, I'll simply make it /blog, and I'll do the same thing for the dashboard link, like so. And in the browser, we can see that these two items are now clickable. So let's test it out. I'll click on blog, which takes us to the blog page. And let's click on dashboard, which takes us to the dashboard page. We can also programmatically navigate to pages using the useRouter hook. We can test this out by going to dashboard, and within dashboard, I'll actually remove this div and replace it with a button with some text like go home. So we can see the button here. On the button, I want to add an on-click event. And what I want to do is when we click on go home, it needs to trigger the useRouter hook that comes standard with Next.js. So we need to import this hook from Next. So I'll import something from next/navigation. And what we want to import is the useRouter hook. Then within our page component, we want to create an instance of this hook. So I'll do that by saying const router equals useRouter. And what we can do then is when the button is clicked, this will trigger an anonymous function. And what we want this function to do is to call router.push. We can then specify the route that we want to go to. For this example, we'll just go back to the home page. Let's save this. And after saving this, we get this error message that says that useRouter only works in client components. This is something that we'll have a look at in depth a bit later on in another video. But basically, with Next 13, all components are server-rendered components by default, which means that when we access a route, it will first be rendered on the server and then returned back to the user. This means that certain functionality, like hooks, are not available on the server. And in that case, we need to specify that this component is a client component instead. This is really easy to do. All we have to do is go to the top of the page and then in quotes write use client. And after saving this, the error will be resolved and we should be able to test the button now. If I click on go home, we are instantly taken back to the home page of the project. Just one more comment on navigation. These pages are actually pre-fetched. So as you hover over these links, the content of these pages are actually cached, which speeds up navigation to these pages. We can see this in action by going to our developer tools and by going to the network tab. I'm going to refresh the application, and after the page is loaded, we can see all of this content here. But notice what happens when I hover over any of these links, like dashboard. We can see that the dashboard file has actually been loaded into memory. And when we click on dashboard, the page is returned almost instantly. The same thing happens if we hover over the blog page. And we can see the blog page was pulled in as well. Let's now also talk about dynamic segments, also known as dynamic routes. So in this example, let's think about our blog page, where the content is dynamically rendered on the screen. So typically when we click on any of our blog pages, typically the navigation would be something like blog / and then followed by the article ID or maybe a slug, etc. So because this name is dynamic, we need to create a dynamic route within the blog folder. So let's do that now. We can create a dynamic route within the blog folder by creating a new folder and then type a square bracket followed by something like ID or slug. This is really up to you. And then closing that off with a closing square bracket. Within this folder, we can now create a page file. And just like with the other page files, we need to export a default function. We can give this function any name. I will just call it something like blog post. And this function needs to return some HTML or return an H1 tag for now with the text, I am a blog post. Let's save this. And if we refresh this page now, we'll get this text saying, I am a blog post. How dynamic routes work is within the parameter list of this function, we will receive a property called params. And we can see the value of params by writing it to the console. Let's actually do that now. In the developer tools, I'll go to the console and let's refresh this page. And because we didn't specify use client, this page is considered to be a server rendered component, and therefore the logs are actually written on the server and not on the client. But in this terminal, we can see our property coming through with a property called slug, and this name is pulled from this dynamic value in the folder over here. And the value of this property is article. And just to show you what a client component would look like is let's add use client at the top of this file and let's save this. And after saving this change, we can now see the slug pulling through on the browser. Let's replace this text with the slug value. So I'm just going to remove this. We'll add curly braces followed by params.slug. And we can now see that text pulling through. Let's change this to something else like test, and we can see that value pulling through. Let's also talk about catch all dynamic segments. If I had to add another nested route to this, something like test2, we will actually get a 404 error because it's expecting us to create another nested route within the slug folder. And it is completely valid to do that. But let's say we wanted this page to deal with all parameters coming in. So what we can do is rename this folder and then start this value with 3 dots. So ... slug. This will now convert this route into a catch-all route. So irrespective of how many segments we pass after this route, they will be pulled in by this page. So let's add a test3 as well, and let's see what happens. And if we have a look at our slug value in the console, we can see that the slug is now an array with all the segment values being passed into it. There's also a concept called optional catch-all dynamic segments. It's very similar to the catch-all segment that we just had a look at. It basically makes all of these segments optional. So let's say we didn't pass any other values in. We just specify the blog page. But maybe we want the blog page to be triggered, whether it's the blog page or whether there's additional segments added to it. So what we can do in that case is we can rename this slug file. We can start it off with a double square brackets and we can end it with double square brackets. And at the moment, if we visit this page, it will actually take us to the page file created in the blog folder. But what we can do is delete this page file. And then if we refresh, this will actually trigger the page file within the slug folder. So this is really a catch-all now. Whether we specify any segments after this or not, this blog page will be triggered. If we don't specify any segments after this, the params attribute will simply be an empty object. Let's also talk about a concept called route groups. A route group is a way to neatly organize your routes without affecting the final URL. So as an example, let's say that the dashboard route is considered to be a part of the administrative features available to the user. We can create a route group by creating a new folder. The folder name then is to use parentheses. Within the parentheses, we can give the folder a name, like administration in this case. And what we can do then is we can move our dashboard route into the route group. So after moving the dashboard route into administration, it will look something like this. But it's important to note that the value in the parentheses does not affect the URL. So back in the browser, we can still go to dashboard and our route is still working. There's no need to type in something like administration/dashboard. We can also use route groups. To assign layouts to specific pages. So let's look at our dashboard as an example. In dashboard, we have a layout file that is applied to the main dashboard route, as well as the nested routes for account and settings. But let's say we wanted a layout that affects account as well as settings without having to create another nested route for that. So what we can do is in the dashboard folder, let's create our route group with parentheses. And let's call this something like account route as an example. And then let's move account and settings into this folder. After doing this, we can still access the nested routes within dashboard. Like let's go to settings as an example. And the addition of this account route folder is not affecting the URL. So what we can do now is within the account route folder, we can create a new file called layout.jsx. I'll actually just go and copy the contents from another layout file. And I'll paste that into this file. And let's change this text over here to account route or something like that. And now we've got a layout that affects only the account and settings folders without affecting the URL. Let's also have a look at the loading file. So within our app project, let's create a new file called loading.jsx. This naming convention of loading is a reserved name in Next 13. We can create our loading file by exporting a default function called loading. And then we can return any HTML code that we want. And what I'll do is I'll actually return an h1 tag with the text loading. So how this works is while the content in the page file is being rendered, this loading component will be displayed. So this file is a very good place to put in something like a loading spinner or just some text like we're doing here. It's very difficult to test this out at the moment because it's loading so quickly. But what I'll do is I'll actually force a loading state. So in order to test out the loading state, I'll add a 1-second delay to our root page file. So what I'll do is I'll create a new function, an async function called getData. So for now, I'll just create this throwaway function called getData. And let's say that this function would call some API to fetch data, and it could take a few seconds to resolve. So all I'm doing is I'm creating a new promise, which will complete after 1 second. So in our home component, let's call this function by awaiting getData. We also need to convert this function to an async function, and that should work. So when we refresh this page, we should see the loading text. Did you see that? I'll try again. Great. We can also add our own 404 pages. So let's try that out. If we try and access a route that does not exist, something like localhost 3000/test, we get this 404 message. We can create our own custom 404 page by going to the app directory. We can create a new file called not-found.jsx. And this file will export a React component. We'll give the page a name like not found. And let's save this. Let's go ahead and refresh this page. And now we are getting our own custom 404 not found page. I think we've covered quite a lot in this video, and there are more reserved files that we can have a look at as well. As an example, the error file. But we'll have a look at that in a future video. We also didn't have a look at this API folder yet, and this is something we will cover in depth in a future video. But in a nutshell, we are able to create our own custom API routes using the API route handler solution. I hope you found this video useful. If you like my content, please consider subscribing to my channel and please like this video. I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.